It's Wednesday, August 5th, and here's what you need to know by noon. Michigan voted yesterday, and the biggest Democratic Senate primary of the year came down to a few thousand votes in one county. A sitting congressman in Detroit spent the night watching his own seat go the same way. Plus, the president says the Strait of Hormuz could open within days, in 2 phases. Missouri sent a message of its own. And there's an arrest in the Spokane fire we've been following since Monday. Start with Michigan, and start with how the counting actually works, because that is the part that explains everything else this morning. Michigan votes early and absentee in enormous numbers, and the law is specific about when those ballots can be processed. Wayne County, that's Detroit and its inner suburbs, collects the largest pile of them in the state, and much of that pile cannot be opened and counted until after the polls close. Drop-box ballots go into the same queue, so Michigan's election night runs backwards from what you might expect. The rural and suburban counties report fast and early. The state's largest Democratic city reports slow and late. And the picture at midnight is not the picture at dawn. You could see it on the board all night. Nearly every congressional district in Michigan sat at 97 to 99% of the vote counted. The 2 exceptions were the 2 Detroit seats, the 13th at 73%, the 12th at 86%. That is not a delay. That is the design of the thing, which is why 2 Michigan races were still hanging this morning on the same outstanding ballots. Here's where the Senate primary stood as of 5 o'clock this morning, Central Time, with about 95% of the vote counted. Abdul El-Sayed had 735,625 votes, 48.6%. Haley Stevens had 716,222, 47.4%. Mallory McMorrow had 60,893, about 4%. That is a margin of 19,403 votes. 1 3/10 of a point. Now the part that matters more than the margin. An hour and a half earlier, at 94% counted, that gap was 20,916 votes. 1 4/10 of a point. Over that hour, on roughly 6,900 additional ballots, Stevens closed by about 1,500 votes and 1/10 of a point. She was gaining, slowly and steadily, every time Detroit reported. That is why nobody had called it. NBC News has projected El-Sayed the winner. The Associated Press had not called the race. Those are 2 different things, and we are going to keep them apart. A network projection is a network's judgment, and it is not a wire service call. We are not going to tell you who won, because as of our deadline this morning, that was not a settled fact. We can tell you it was under 2 points, and we can tell you which direction it was moving. The second race was the 13th District, and it is an incumbent Democrat in trouble. At 73% counted, the lowest figure on the board, the challenger, State Representative Donovan McKinney, had 53,559 votes to Congressman Sri Thanadar's 50,308, 51.5 to 48.5, a margin of 3,251 votes. Same city, same uncounted ballots, same reason it had not been called. 1 caution, and it is ours to carry. Thanadar has been through a contested primary before, and a search this morning surfaces a headline saying he won one, with a wire service call attached. That headline is from August of 2024. It is a different election. We checked the date before we said a word about it, and so should anyone else reading about this race today. The rest of Michigan is settled, and it is worth 2 minutes. The Republican Senate primary was not a contest. Mike Rogers ran unopposed, which means there is nothing to tabulate, and he is the nominee. That is simply how an uncontested race resolves when the polls close. The Republican primary for governor went to John James, with 99% counted, 465,170 votes. Here's a detail you only find if you do the division yourself. That is 50.05%. James cleared an outright majority of his own primary by 0.05 of a point. Perry Johnson took 35%. Mike Cox 13%. Eric Nesbitt under 2%. On the Democratic side, Jocelyn Benson took it in a walk. 83% to Christopher Swanson 17%, with Swanson conceding. Benson is the nominee. And one number with its caveat attached, because the number is real and the conclusion is not. Democrats cast just over 1.5 million votes in their Senate primary. Republicans cast about 929,000 in their governor's race. That is 1.6 to 1. But the Republican Senate primary was uncontested. Nobody had a reason to turn out for it. So the ratio is a fact, and an enthusiasm gap is an inference, and we are not making it. Now the Strait of Hormuz, where the story we have run for 3 days moved again. The president, speaking Tuesday evening, said an opening could come, quote, tomorrow or the next day. A lot of progress has been made, end quote. And he laid it out in 2 stages. The first phase is the opening of the straits. The second phase will be the denuclearization. Those are his words and his sequence. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, confirmed progress but would not go further, saying there is, quote, not finality yet. The shape of the reported arrangement is worth hearing, with the caveat that it is reported, not confirmed by any party. Ships would enter through a route Iran controls and exit through a route Oman controls, with service fees attached, and with a possible link to lifting American port blockades. The talks themselves are between Iran and Oman. Iran continues to say publicly that it's not negotiating directly with the United States, the same position its foreign ministry took on Monday, and we flagged that gap yesterday. It is not closed. Brent crude slipped about 1% to just over $78 a barrel. We said this yesterday, and it still holds. We are not going to tell you what oil does next, and we are not going to tell you which of these accounts is the true one. We will tell you what each party said, and who said it. 3 more quickly. Missouri held a rematch. Congressman Wesley Bell beat former Congresswoman Cori Bush in the Democratic primary, the same matchup as their last one, with the same result. Right alongside Michigan, you have 2 Democratic primaries on the same night in 2 states, and they did not point the same direction. That is the honest read, and it is more useful than a national narrative. Spokane. A man has been charged over the largest of the fires burning around the city, and investigators have questioned him about 2 other fires from last year. We are not naming him on screen. He is accused and not convicted, and we are not putting a casualty figure on this. The numbers moved all week, and we would rather be a day slow than wrong. And the rest of the board. 25 states are suing the administration over the new tariffs. In eastern Congo, an Ebola outbreak that health officials are describing as the fastest growing they have tracked is now reported at roughly 1,700 dead. Overnight, a Russian missile and drone barrage across the Kyiv region is reported to have killed 17 people. And back in Michigan, the FBI is investigating cyber attacks against water systems there and in Minnesota. What to watch? Michigan's last ballots and whatever calls follow them. Hormuz on the president's own 2-day clock. And the Spokane defendant's first appearance. That's Michigan, counted the hard way. And a strait that may open this week. We keep it straight, and we keep it quick. This is No by noon. That's where things stand. See you tomorrow.